okay, I'm going to take a completely different approach. We've heard about human resources, human capital economics approach. I'm going to try and contextualize that in a broader way. Even if you look at social theory outside of economics, people like Pierre Bourdieu, for example, has written extensively on different forms of capital, social, culture, and so on. You see there's a much bigger, sort of more complex body of theory about different forms of capital. I don't want to go into that. It's a huge field, and the question that, I ask myself, having read a fair bit of that, is how many forms of capital are there? And I'm sort of convinced in the sense that as many as you like, whatever, all it requires is value that can be improved. So anything you can have any number of forms of capital. And how you classify, you can then kind of have typologies, that's all very well and useful, but ultimately there's no limit. But there are sort of certain fundamentals. Now, instead of dwelling on abstractions, let me give you an example. When I did my first field research in Indonesia, I studied people who didn't have a cash economy. They cultivated mixed gardens. It was basically a subsistence economy. Land was communally owned. And they had a complex system of distribution of land whereby any person who married would be part of the village council. And at a certain point, they would retire from that when they were old. In their period of membership, their status would accrue, from becoming, being basically servile to being a village head and eventually a spiritual leader, a priest. And then they would retire, and that land would return to the person who just married. That was the system. So when I looked at what people did, they spent about 3 hours a day working, what we call working. They weren't busy chasing money and having more than the next person. That's not what capital was. But they were very, very busy indeed, doing something very different. So to me, the fact that it wasn't an economic economy, there are reasons for that. They had what I call the status economy. What they were busy chasing every day was status. And indeed, if they had any surplus at all, they reinvested it into ritual, which would boost their status. So they were ways of accumulating status, and there was a competition over it. I also found that when I looked at case studies of people trying to accumulate a large amount of status, there were mechanisms. First of all, they would exhaust them, they would have a surplus, and then be unable to maintain. Or there were also rules in the system that you had to play by. So there are limits. You had to cooperate in the sense of a communicative game of reckoning, measuring status. And if you violated that game, basically you were ignored. Your claims would have been invalid. So if you made a status claim, you had to be within that framework. So whenever, the currency in the system was not money, but approval. And I'll venture to say that approval for human beings is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. Everybody wants to be seen and valued for what they are as a valuable contributor to the whole. And then I looked further and I found they had a very sophisticated technology of controlling this status competition and containing it within certain limits. One of those was that Council of Elders, so thereby every person would go through a whole range of ranks in their life journey and have different levels of status from very low to very high in the end. So it was very egalitarian in that way. But there were ways to also manipulate and accumulate status. But still, it was kept under control by that system. So why I'm saying that we can't go back to a subsistence economy, very unlikely, but it's interesting to contemplate because it's a very different way of living your life to live in such a status economy. And it can be just as busy, just as you know, their life is full, you know, in a different way. And their consumption levels were very low. And, you know, we hear now about subsistence allowances being paid. It's the idea that's floating around. You know, you can imagine what a society might be like. Their subsistence is sort of taken care of. There's a highly efficient production methods for bodies. You hear all that. Leisure society. Well, these people had a lot of leisure time. The way their energies were absorbed was in this status economy, where everybody was competing to be seen as, you know, ultimately the way status was measured as proximity to the sacred, to the ancestors, to whom all the land belonged. So it's the whole sort of direction is oriented towards the source of life, the ancestors, that sort of thing. But whatever the value is, the core value, I think people's energies can be absorbed into social life greatly, more than they are now. It doesn't have, you don't have to have this sort of individualist accumulation of material capital or economic capital. You can absorb people's energies into very different things, different, the pursuit of different values that are not material. And I think that's probably necessary in some way.